Every city on a great river lives by a number that almost none of its residents have ever heard. It is the maximum rate at which the river beside them can flow without flooding, the fastest the water can move past their homes before it climbs over the banks and the dikes and into the streets. Engineers call it the safe discharge capacity, and it is a hard limit, set by the width and depth of the channel and the height of the flood walls, a ceiling on how much water the city can pass through itself before it drowns. Below that number, the river is a river. Above it, the river is a disaster. And when the largest dam on Earth, the Three Gorges Dam on the Yangtze, is forced to release water faster than the cities downstream can carry it away, that number is exceeded, and the flooding is no longer a risk. It is arithmetic. That is the situation this story is about, and it is a very different thing from the dam simply breaking. The dam does not have to fail for the cities below it to flood. It only has to release water faster than those cities can handle, and in the worst floods, it must. Because holding it back would threaten the dam itself. So the operators open the outlets, and the water pours down the river, and if the rate of that release, combined with everything else feeding the river, exceeds the safe capacity of a city downstream, then that city floods. No matter how strong its dikes, no matter how ready its people, no matter how much anyone wishes otherwise. It is not a question of will. It is a question of flow rate against capacity, of a number coming down the river against a number built into the city. And when the first number is bigger than the second, the water goes where it has nowhere else to go, which is into the streets and the homes and the lives of the millions who live beside a river that is being asked to carry more than it can. So this is a story about rate and capacity, about the brutal, unforgiving physics of how much water a river can move, and what happens when a dam sends down more than that, faster than the cities below were ever built to endure. It is about why the dam is sometimes forced to do this, about the hidden ways the flood is made worse by things happening below the dam that the dam cannot control, about the coordination nightmare of trying to match a release rate to a downstream capacity across hundreds of miles of river, and about what it actually looks like when the number coming down the river wins. Because the Three Gorges Dam is one of the great engineering achievements in human history, and even so, there are floods where the only choices it has are all bad. And the water it releases arrives at the cities faster than those cities can possibly cope. Let me take you downstream to the moment the release arrives, because that is where the numbers become real. Picture a city on the middle Yangtze during a hard flood summer. It has been raining for weeks, and the river is already high, running fast and brown against the tops of the great dikes that have protected the city for generations. The people know the drill. They have been watching the water climb, reinforcing the flood walls, stacking sandbags, moving what they can to higher floors. And then word comes down the river that upstream, the Three Gorges Dam, its own reservoir, filled to the brink by the same relentless rain, is increasing its releases, opening its outlets wider, sending more water down. The people on the dikes understand exactly what that means, even if they could not name the engineering. It means the river, already near the top of what it can carry, is about to be asked to carry more. Over the following hours, the water climbs higher, past the marks of previous years, toward the very top of the dikes, and the defense becomes a desperate, round-the-clock battle against a level that will not stop rising. And here is the cruelty of the rate problem. It is not that the dam sends down an impossible wall of water all at once. It is that it sends down a flow that is just a little more than the city can pass, hour after hour, so that the river creeps up and up. And the city holds and holds until the water finds the one weak spot or simply climbs over the top and pours in. The city did everything right. It was simply asked to carry more water per second than its channel and its walls could physically move, and no amount of effort changes that arithmetic. Bring it down to a single family to feel it. They live on a low street in that riverside city, a few blocks back from the dike, a home they have lived in for years, through many high water seasons that came and went without harm. This year the rain has been different, heavier, longer, and they have been watching the river the way everyone does, with a wary eye and a growing unease. When the news spreads that the dam upstream is increasing its releases, the father does what his neighbors do, moving the family's belongings to the upper floor, parking the car on higher ground, filling containers with clean water. And then they wait, and they watch the water in the street drain slow at the storm grates, because the river outside is now higher than the pipes that are supposed to carry the rain away. Overnight, the water begins to well up out of those grates instead of draining into them, pushed back by the swollen river. And it creeps across the street and then up the front steps and into the ground floor, not because the dike broke, but because the river is too high for the city to drain and the pumps cannot keep up. By morning, the family is on the upper floor, looking down at brown water where their living room used to be, and out beyond the dike, the river runs higher than the rooftops, carrying the flow the dam had no choice but to send. Multiply that family by the millions who live along the middle and lower river, and you have the human shape of a single number, the release rate exceeding another number, the capacity, across an entire crowded land. To understand why this happens, you have to understand that a river is not an infinite pipe. It has a maximum flow, and every city sets its defenses against a specific number. When engineers build the flood defenses of a city on a river, they do not build them infinitely high. They build them to handle a chosen level of flood, a design capacity, a maximum rate of flow that the dikes and the channel can safely pass. That number is a compromise, because building higher and wider costs enormous sums and takes enormous space, so a city protects itself against floods up to a certain size and accepts the small risk of something larger. The safe discharge capacity is that number made concrete, the flow rate at which the river runs full to the top of its defenses but does not overflow. Send the river anything up to that rate, and the city stays dry. Send it more, and the excess has nowhere to go but over the banks. This is the fundamental reality that governs everything downstream of the dam. Each city has its own number, its own ceiling, set by its own dikes and its own stretch of channel, and the entire task of flood management on the river is, at its heart, the task of never letting the flow at any city exceed that city's number. The dam is the great tool for doing that, holding back water in the wet times so the river downstream stays below the ceiling. But the reservoir behind the dam is not infinite either, and when it fills, the dam loses its power to keep the flow below the number, and the number gets exceeded, and the arithmetic turns against the city. So why does the dam release faster than the cities can handle? Because in the worst floods, once the reservoir is full, it has no other choice. And this is the trap at the center of it all. The Three Gorges Reservoir has a large amount of space set aside to catch and hold floodwater, and in a normal flood, that is exactly what it does, swallowing the surge and releasing it slowly, keeping the flow at the cities below their safe numbers. This is the dam working as intended, and it prevents an enormous amount of flooding that the raw, untamed river would have caused. But in an extreme flood, the water pouring into the reservoir can fill that space, and once the reservoir is full, the physics become inescapable. Whatever flows into a full reservoir must flow out because there is nowhere else for it to go. If the inflow from upstream is running at a tremendous rate, then the outflow must eventually match it. And if that rate is higher than the safe capacity of the cities below, then the dam is forced to release water faster than those cities can handle, or else let its own reservoir rise past the safe limit and endanger the dam itself. Faced with that choice, the operators release the water, because a controlled flood downstream, however terrible, is better than risking the failure of the dam, which would be a catastrophe beyond imagining. So the release faster than the cities can handle is not a mistake or a malfunction. It is the dam being overwhelmed by a flood larger than its reservoir can absorb, forced to pass along a flow it cannot hold, at a rate the cities below were never built to survive. The dam raised the ceiling on how big a flood the cities could endure. It did not remove the ceiling, and the greatest floods still rise above it. And this is not a theoretical scenario, because the dam has already been pushed to exactly this wall within recent memory. In the worst flood seasons of recent years, torrential rains across the Yangtze basin sent water pouring into the reservoir at staggering rates, tens of thousands of cubic meters every second. Among the largest inflows the dam has ever faced, filling its flood storage and forcing the operators to open the floodgates and send enormous volumes downstream, even as the cities below were already flooding from the rains. The world briefly noticed, as headlines reported, that the water inside the Great Dam was nearing its limits, and asked, out loud, whether the structure could handle what the river was throwing at it. The dam held, and its defenders pointed to the flooding it prevented. But downstream, the floods of those seasons affected tens of millions of people, forced huge numbers to evacuate, drowned vast areas of farmland, and caused tens of billions in losses. A disaster into which the dam's own forced releases were woven. Because once the reservoir was full, the operators had no choice but to pass along a flow that the swollen, rain-fed river below simply could not absorb. Those seasons were the clearest demonstration there is of the rate problem in action, the dam releasing at a rate the downstream could not handle, not out of failure, but out of the sheer overwhelming volume of water that no reservoir on Earth could have fully held. It has already happened. The question is only how often and how badly it happens again. And here is the part that makes the whole problem far harder and far crueler. Because the dam is not the only thing feeding the river. Below it, more water is always joining, and the dam cannot control any of it. The flow that arrives at a downstream city is not simply whatever the dam released. It is the dam's release plus everything that joins the river between the dam and the city. Major tributaries pour in from the surrounding lands, each carrying its own flood from the same rains. Water runs off the saturated ground of the whole basin directly into the river. Rain falls on the downstream regions themselves, adding still more. So the total flow reaching a city is the sum of the dam's release and all of these uncontrolled contributions, and it is that sum, not the dam's release alone, that has to stay below the city's safe number. This is what turns the dam operator's job into an almost impossible one. To keep a downstream city safe, they must hold their own release low enough that when it combines with all the tributary inflow and local runoff below the dam, the total still comes in under the city's ceiling. Which means they must accurately forecast all of that uncontrolled water, the tributaries, the runoff, the local rain, hours and days in advance, and set their release accordingly. Get the forecast wrong, or face a downstream rainstorm bigger than expected, and the total blows past the city's number, even if the dam's own release seemed reasonable. The dam controls only one of the taps feeding the river. The others are opened by the sky, and the sky does not coordinate with the dam, which means that even a perfectly managed release can be overwhelmed by water that joins the river far below the dam's reach, in a downpour the operators could not fully see coming. And layered on top of that is the problem of time, because water takes time to travel down a river. And that turns flood management into a guessing game played against the clock. When the dam releases water, that water does not arrive at the downstream cities instantly. It travels down the river, taking hours to reach the nearer cities and days to reach the far ones. So that the flood the dam releases today is the flood a distant city faces tomorrow or the day after. This means the operators cannot simply react to what is happening at the cities right now. They must anticipate, releasing water based on forecasts of what the flood will be doing at each city when their release finally arrives there, coordinating a flow across hundreds of miles of river and multiple days of travel time. They must think about how their release will combine with the tributary floods that will join at various points along the way, each with its own timing, so that the peaks do not stack up and arrive at a city all at once. It is a problem of extraordinary complexity, matching a release rate now to a downstream capacity later, across a whole basin of moving water, under deep uncertainty about the rain still to come. And the consequences of getting the timing wrong are severe. Release too much too early, and you flood the cities before the worst even arrives, while also emptying the reservoir space you will need for the peak. Release too little, and the reservoir fills before the flood passes, forcing an even more dangerous release later. The operators are threading a needle across time and distance, trying to keep every city below its number at every moment, with imperfect forecasts and a river that answers only to physics. And in the greatest floods, there is simply no thread that fits through the needle, no release schedule that keeps every city safe. Because the total volume of water is more than the whole system can pass without someone, somewhere, going under. And it is worth picturing the people who actually make these decisions, because their job in a great flood is one of the most agonizing in all of engineering. Somewhere in a control center, hydrologists and engineers watch a wall of data pour in, the water level in the reservoir climbing, the inflow from upstream, the rainfall forecasts across the whole basin, the levels at gauge after gauge down the length of the river, the safe capacity numbers for each city glowing like red lines that must not be crossed. And they must decide, in real time, how much water to release and when, knowing that every choice floods someone or risks something. Release more now to save reservoir space for a bigger surge tomorrow. And you push a downstream city closer to its limit today. Hold back to protect that city, and you fill the reservoir toward the level that threatens the dam. They are not managing this dam alone either, because the Yangtze system includes other reservoirs and other controls. A whole network that must be coordinated so that releases and tributary peaks do not stack up and arrive at the same city at the same moment. It is a chess game played against the sky, with imperfect forecasts, millions of lives on the board, and no move that does not cost something. And in the greatest floods, the game becomes unwinnable, because the total water is simply more than the whole system can pass safely, and the operators are left not choosing how to avoid disaster, but choosing how to distribute it. Which city bears more and which bears less? An inhuman calculation forced on them by a volume of water that has exceeded every option they have. That is the reality behind the calm official statements about managing a flood. It is a room full of people doing arithmetic that has run out of good answers. Now consider the cities themselves, because even a city whose dikes hold can drown from the inside, and this is one of the least understood parts of the whole disaster. A city on a great river is often lower than the river beside it during a flood, protected by the dikes that hold the high water out. But the city still produces its own water, the rain falling directly on its streets and roofs, and that water has to be gotten out of the city and into the river somehow. Normally, it drains out by gravity, flowing downhill into the river. But when the river outside is running high, higher than the city inside, gravity no longer helps, and the city's water cannot flow out, because the river it would drain into is above it. Now the city depends entirely on pumps, great pumping stations that lift the internal water up and over the dikes and into the swollen river. And those pumps have a maximum rate, a capacity of their own. When the rain falling on the city, plus any seepage through and under the dikes, comes in faster than the pumps can lift it out, the water begins to pool inside the city, rising in the streets even though the dikes are perfectly intact and the river has not come over the top at all. The city floods from within, waterlogged by its own rain that it cannot expel against the high river outside. So the safe capacity of a city is not just about its dikes. It is also about its pumps, its internal drainage, its ability to get its own water out against a river held high by the dam's release. And when the dam keeps the river high for days on end, it keeps the city's pumps fighting a losing battle the entire time, so that even a city the flood never breaches can still fill with water, slowly. From the inside, because the high river outside has taken away its ability to drain. And the dikes, the great walls that hold the whole system together, have limits of their own that the sustained high water steadily erodes, turning time itself into a weapon. A dike is not an impregnable wall. It is, very often, a great embankment of earth, and earth has weaknesses. When a river is held high against a dike for a long time, day after day, the water works on it relentlessly. It seeps into the earth, saturating it, making it heavier and weaker. It finds any flaw, any animal burrow or old crack or poorly compacted spot, and works water through it. A process that can hollow out a channel inside the dike and cause it to collapse from within. A failure called piping that can bring down a dike that is not even being overtopped. The current scours at the base. The saturated earth can slump and slide. So the longer the river is held high, the more the dikes are tested, and a dike that could withstand a brief surge may fail under a sustained one, giving way after days of pressure that a shorter flood would never have applied. This means the dam's release rate interacts with the dikes not just through height, but through duration. A high release held for a long time to pass a large and prolonged flood keeps the dikes under maximum stress for the maximum time, precisely the condition most likely to find their hidden weaknesses and break them. So even below the level of outright overtopping, releasing water at a high rate for a long period is its own kind of danger, slowly loading the dikes toward failure. So that the flood can breach the defenses not by climbing over them, but by patiently working them apart from the inside, while the high water refuses to recede. And there is one more piece of the capacity problem that has quietly gotten worse over the years, which is that the river has lost some of the natural help it used to have in absorbing floods. Along the middle Yangtze sit Great Lakes, natural basins connected to the river that historically acted as safety valves, swelling to take in the river's excess when it flooded and giving the water somewhere to spread other than the cities. For a river straining against its capacity, those lakes were a gift, extra room to hold a surge. But over the decades, many such lakes and wetlands across the basin have been shrunk, drained, cut off, or filled in, reclaimed for farmland and for the ever-growing cities themselves, so that the natural flood-absorbing capacity of the whole system has been steadily reduced even as the population it must protect has grown. Land that once could flood safely taking pressure off the river, is now covered in homes and fields that must themselves be protected, which forces even more water to stay in the main channel, pushing the flow at the cities higher. So the safe capacity of the river has been eroded from two directions at once, by the silt filling the reservoir upstream and by the loss of the natural floodplains and lakes downstream, while the demands on it have only grown. The river has less room to spread than it once did, less help in swallowing a flood, which means the dam's releases run into a downstream system already stripped of some of its old resilience, and the rate that would once have been absorbed by a lake now goes straight at a dike instead. We did not only build a great dam to fight the floods, we also, without quite meaning to, took away some of the river's own ancient defenses, and the two changes together have left the cities more exposed to the very releases the dam is forced to make. So what does it actually look like when the release outruns the cities, when the number coming down the river beats the number built into the defenses? It looks like catastrophe spread across a vast and crowded land. When the great floods come and the dam is forced to release faster than the cities can carry it away, the result downstream is a disaster measured in the tens of millions of lives affected. Cities see their streets turned to rivers, their ground floors submerged, their pumps overwhelmed. Some dikes are overtopped as the flow exceeds the safe capacity, the water pouring over the top and into the districts behind. Some fail from within after days of pressure. Vast areas of farmland go under, drowning crops across one of the most important agricultural regions in the country. Millions of people are forced to evacuate, and hundreds may lose their lives to drowning, to collapsing structures, to the chaos of a flood that arrives partly from the sky and partly from the dam. The economic losses run into the tens of billions. And through all of it runs the released water, the flow that the dam had no choice but to pass, arriving at city after city down the length of the river faster than each could handle, overwhelming the defenses that had held against every smaller flood but could not hold against this one. The dam reduced the total flooding compared to what the wild river would have unleashed. And its defenders are right to say so. But reduced is not prevented, and when the release outruns the city's capacity, what gets through is still a catastrophe of staggering scale, and the people beneath it pay the price of a flood too large for even the greatest dam to fully tame. And this is only going to become more common, because every factor that drives the release past the city's capacity is getting worse. The climate is warming, and a warmer atmosphere delivers heavier, more extreme rainfall, which means bigger floods pouring into the reservoir and more uncontrolled water joining the river below the dam, both pushing the flows toward and past the city's safe numbers more often. At the same time, the reservoir's ability to buffer floods is slowly shrinking because the Yangtze carries an immense load of sediment, and that silt steadily accumulates behind the dam, filling in the very space meant to hold floodwater, so that the reservoir reaches full and is forced into high releases sooner in a given flood than it once would have. And the cities downstream keep growing, packing more people and more property into the floodplain, so that any given flood that outruns the defenses now threatens more lives and more wealth than the same flood would have a generation ago. So the mismatch at the heart of this story between the rate the dam must release and the rate the cities can handle is widening from both ends. Bigger floods forcing bigger releases, and more at stake below when those releases arrive. The impossible balancing act that the operators perform in every major flood is becoming harder, the margin thinner, the number coming down the river larger and more frequent, while the number the cities can absorb rises only slowly, if at all. The dam bought the downstream cities an enormous amount of protection, but it did not and could not buy them infinite protection, and the floods that exceed what it can offer are coming more often, not less. Stand on the great dam on a calm day, the water flowing smoothly through, the turbines humming, the mighty river seemingly mastered. And it is easy to believe that human engineering has conquered the Yangtze once and for all, that no flood could ever again outrun the defenses of the cities below. But wait for the great flood, the one that fills the reservoir and forces the operators to the wall, and watch what happens. The rains fall for weeks, the reservoir climbs to its limit, the tributaries pour in below the dam, and the operators, out of choices, open the outlets wider and send down a flow that they know, with cold certainty, is more than the cities can carry. And down the river, the water rises past the safe marks, over the dikes or through them, into the streets of cities that did everything right and were simply asked to pass more water than physics would allow. The dam did not break. It did exactly what it was built to do, which is to survive, and to pass along the flood it could not hold, at whatever rate the water demanded, onto the people below. Because in the end, that is the truth the engineering can never escape. A river can only carry so much, so fast. A city can only pass so much, so fast. And when the sky sends down more than all of it combined can handle, the water goes where water always goes, downhill, into the low places, into the homes of the millions who live beside a river that is, in the greatest floods, simply carrying more than the world below it was ever built to bear. The dam controls the rate as long as it can. And then the rain takes the decision out of its hands, and the number coming down the river becomes larger than any number the cities can answer. And the flood, released faster than they can handle, arrives. It is a humbling thing to sit with, that we built the mightiest flood control structure in the history of the world, and it still cannot change the oldest law of moving water, that a channel carries what it carries and no more, and that when the sky insists on sending down more than that, the surplus becomes a flood no matter whose hands are on the gates. The dam decides the rate for as long as the rain lets it. In the greatest floods, the rain decides, and the cities downstream simply have to endure the number it chooses.